computer and just want to say welcome. This is Zoom session number 2 on the topic of business writing, and I will be covering the do's and don'ts of creating business documents. And this happens to be your discussion post assignment for module number 2. So you have the next 3 weeks to complete that. And I will be basically doing it for you in this Zoom session, but there's still other instructions in the assignment. So don't just take my list and post it as your assignment. Make sure that you make an initial list. Hopefully you already have. Then you comment on 2 other students' lists, and then you post your final list, ideally on the last week before it's due. So again, you have 3 weeks to do it, but I'm basically going to give you the final list in this Zoom session together. So what I want to say right off the bat is that business writing, and the reason that I even do this video, is so much different than writing an essay or what you learned in your English class. There's a lot of things that still apply, obviously. Your proper grammar, your proper sentence structure, your punctuation, all that still applies. All the rules of English apply. But the difference is in your essay class or your English 1 class, the focus there was always writing a report or writing a paper on this topic and make it 6 pages long or make it 4 pages long. And so you found yourself, trying to fill it and cram it full of as much information as you could to meet that deadline or that requirement of how many pages it needed to be. As well, in your English class, they oftentimes really promoted, use descriptive language, be creative in the way that you write it, be very descriptive and kind of paint a picture. And all that's wonderful when you're writing a book or writing an essay, but in a business setting, most of your communications are just general, everyday conversations that you would have with your colleagues about the work that needs to be done, right? So we don't really have room for long documents and flowery language and descriptive language. We just want to communicate as simply and as clearly as we can. So it's
Okay.
kind of the opposite. English, you learned write the document, make it long and creative and descriptive. And here we're saying make it short, simple, clear, to the point, and avoid all the extras that could make it unclear or make it too long, right? So that's one major difference, and that's why I do this video. Is I want to make it very clear that we're creating business documents, not writing essays. Second thing that's different is that in essays, it doesn't really matter how the essay looks, as long as you typically do a double spaced document and that you do indents on the first paragraph. And then, doesn't matter how long the paragraph is, it could be 2 pages long, right, before it finally ends. And so in business writing, it's the exact opposite. There are rules to follow to make your document look appealing, to make it more desirable to read, and that it looks neat and organized on the page. So it's kind of it's kind of a nonverbal language, your business document, and how you present yourself in that document is a nonverbal message that I am organized, I'm orderly, I'm making it easy for you to read, or I'm not, right? So how it looks and how it's presented is just as important as how it reads. You can have a document that reads beautifully, was written excellent, but if it's difficult to read because of how it looks, it's all one paragraph or it's 3 pages long, double spaced like an essay, it's going to lose its edge because it's not. I'm busy. I don't have time to go through 3 pages of double spaced text, right? I want to make it where my reader can scan it quickly, they can read it quickly, they can get to the point of what needs to be communicated quickly and clearly. And so those are the 2 primary differences, and those are the reasons why I take time to talk about this, because as you know, as people will be now submitting writing assignments, they're going to be sending me essays, right? Not business documents. So I want to kind of cut that short and say, no, give me a business document. Here's what I mean by a business document.
That's right.
So that's what I'm going to talk about in this Zoom session. So I'm going to start by just doing the do's and don'ts. I'll explain each one as I do, and some of them will be repeated from what I just said. And then at the end, I'll show you some business documents to kind of give you a visual of what I'm typically looking for in these documents, and also how to format them, because that's one of the requirements. So you should see on your screen the Dues Business Writing Final Revision. And notice I put in there 50% how it reads and then 50% how it looks. So again, a business document has to have an appealing look to it. And that's going to make you a more desirable author to the people who read your documents if you can make it visually appealing. So I'll demonstrate what I mean by that in this Zoom session. So let's go over the do's and don'ts of first how it reads. So very first thing that your book mentions, and it needs to be mentioned, is that your tone should be conversational, right? Just because it's a business document doesn't mean it needs to sound like a legal document, and it doesn't need to sound like you're talking to your buddies, down at the corner. It needs to be kind of just conversational, like how you would talk normally, simply, clearly. If you need me to do something, you'd give me clear instructions on how to do it. In the same way, your business document needs to be conversational, not too formal. Please be advised that the telephonic communication was sent on. No, I called you on Thursday. That's the way we talk. So that's the way it should read. And again, not too informal where you're using slang or you're using, shorthand or emojis, things like that. We'll talk about that in a second. Secondly, is that it's positive, right? Business, you always want to come across positive, upbeat. The tone should be positive. It should never be negative, harsh, or focused on what you cannot do. It should always be focused. Maybe I can't do this, but I can do this instead, right? So it's always pointing people to the positive and focusing on the positive. I think the example that you had was one of the sentences on the exam, and it was the construction. It said something like, the soil is soggy. Work on your project has come to a halt because the soil is soggy and we cannot pour the foundations. Well, it's all negative, right? It's soggy, can't pour the foundations, it's come to a halt. It's like, oh, the end of the world has come, right? But I can make it super positive. I can say construction's going to start soon once the soil dries, right? I'm saying the same thing, but I'm saying it positively. And that's the idea. Even when you're giving negative news, you want to try and deliver it as positively as you can. Also, not being harsh, not jumping. Oh, you must have got bumped out.
Actually, that's me. I'm trying to connect to the Zoom meeting from another device.
Okay, no worries. I let you in. So yeah, positive. Be careful of being harsh. Some people kind of take a what we call a leader X style, where it's like everybody needs to be prodded and pushed and punished and all that. And so we can come across, unless you abide by these principles, you will be terminated immediately. Those are the kind of things you kind of want to avoid, in a business document. So conversational, positive. Next one is clear and plain. I already mentioned that quite a bit. Um, if you if you write it in a clear, plain language like everyday language, people of other cultures that maybe have an English barrier will also be able to understand you more clearly because they will understand that. They may not understand descriptive or flowery languages or large vocabularies. So keeping it clear and plain and simple is always going to benefit the larger audience and make your document much more easy to read and to remember. Oh. Next one is you-centered. We learned about this with the sentences as well. It always should be about not what I want from you or what I need from you, but how what I'm asking for benefits you or what I'm telling you benefits you. I think the great example is one of those other sentences we did. I think it's the one about, we offer, due to our national policy, we offer name brands at discount prices. So therefore, we do allow cash refund or do allow store credit on returned merchandise, but not cash refunds. And it made it very we centered. We, our policy, we. So the way to make that you centered is simply say, for you to continue to get name brands at discount prices, you can get store credit for returned merchandise, but not cash refunds, right? So I made it all about you. It's all about what you get and for your benefit. So that's what we mean by you centered. Always keep that in mind. Again, brief, short versus long and unnecessary. A lot of people have these long lead-ins. They'll say, I am writing to you this letter today to let you know about, well, they already know that you're writing the letter to them because they're getting it, So those kinds of things are long, unnecessary. If you go through any document and you really get serious about editing it down, you'll find that you could probably get rid of 40% of what you wrote. You don't even need it. And so it's the idea of keeping it brief and to the point. Every document in this class should not be more than a page long, and ideally even less. So even when you get into letters where you have the return address and signature block, or sorry, return address and inside address and signature, all that, it still should be on one page. You should be able to get it down to one page, even with all the other things that you'll be doing. I would say if it's ever longer than one page, then you need to edit it down. That's my advice on any document in this class. Some of them get a little, like your resume gets a little long sometimes. I understand that. But even then, unless you have a lot of experience and a lot of stuff that's unique and you're not repeating yourself over and over, then you can go more than one page, 2 pages. But ideally, get it on one. Cover letter, always one page, that kind of thing. All right, then you want to change up your sentence type. So they say in your book that the easiest type of sentence to remember is simple sentences. And of course, that's because they're just one independent clause and they are very easy to read, very easy to remember, but they make your document sound a little chunky because you're like, as you're reading it. So in order to make it a little more flow a little better is to use, compound sentences with a conjunction or a comma and conjunction or a complex compound where you have an independent clause and then a dependent clause. That just makes it flow a little nicer and a little smoother to read. But ideally, you're looking at about 20 word sentences. So the problem most students have isn't choppiness, it's long windedness. And they just keep adding a comma and adding more information, adding a comma and adding more information. And so roughly you're shooting for around 20 plus words, but no, not a whole bunch more. That's going to make your sentences easier to remember, easier to read. I call it less clunky. Sometimes they just get clunky, they're going on and on and on and on. So um, your goal is to change it up, but then avoid long sentences. That's the big one. Takeaway there. All right. Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, use proper grammar, proper punctuation. Be careful that you're not doing what you would do in a text message, that you're using shorthand or incomplete sentences or no punctuation at all. So that's a big no-no. And that's what I use next. Use complete sentences, not shorthand. Emojis, I mean, I don't know. I'm not personally against emojis, but of course some people way overdo them and they can come across as a little bit informal. So I think there's a place and time and place for them, but I would use them sparingly, but not shorthand for sure, not like you would do in a text.
What do you think about those office emojis?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, people use them. I guess if I'm trying to be professional and it depends on the context and who I'm sending it to, I'd probably not use any. But if I'm sending you a message, you're a student and I might send you a smiley face or a thumbs up or something because that might, especially in an email or something like that, it might be more appropriate. But like in a formal letter, I would never use them, and in
Okay.
most memos, I would never use them. But maybe in an email occasionally. So
Yeah, when I used to have upset bosses or I see they're going through a rough day,
yeah,
when sometimes when I send them messages, we both know that emojis are a big no-no, but that would make them smile and
yeah,
they would respond with more and more, and just it was just a fun way to communicate with my boss and
yeah.
just to show that we are there sometimes.
Kind of to cool the area, cool, to kind of send a positive, a little something positive that would make them smile, maybe takes this pressure off or the stress off. That's good. Okay. Next thing is parallel sentences. So whenever you're writing, it's real easy to again add a comma in another part of the sentence, and it doesn't fit with the rest, or it's not in the same order. So we went over this in the sentence rewrites as well. I think there was a couple you did. One of them was about linking cross references. It was something like searching and filtering and then linking, and they had the last one and cross reference links or whatever it was, and it wasn't quite using the same kind of word. Usually, when you're making a sentence parallel and you're mentioning 3 or 4 items, they should all start with the same type of word. So either a noun or a verb or adverb or whatever. But you don't want one as a noun, one as a verb, one as an adverb, because then it's unparalleled. So you want it that helps the sentence to flow. The other example was, I think it was about the person that was overseeing the branch and the region in their name. Alba Cervantes will now oversee the eastern branch of the western region. And then the next part of the sentence was completely opposite. And the idea is each part of the sentence flows in the same order, and that helps you to make it parallel. So, again, the big thing is not using incomplete sentences or run on sentences. That's, again, where they're putting commas and adding new information that has nothing to do with what they've been talking about at the beginning. Just make a new sentence. That's always the way to do it. I'll see them really long and I'll just say, make this three sentences, versus one long one. And it's easy to do. We just need to take a little time to do it. And then, of course, proper structure. So every document you write, whether it be an email, a text, even, or any kind of formal letter or memo, you should always have an introduction of some sort, of opening salutation, then the body of the message, and then some kind of conclusion, with thank you or sincerely or, whatever. I appreciate your compliance or whatever it might be. They should always follow some kind of structure. And that's the problem. If you just get on the page and you're just vomiting out everything you want to say and it's all disorganized and unorderly, then it makes you come across unprofessional. But if you take a little time and you put your information together, and that's the next thing is what we call chunking, grouping like information together so that it all, paragraph one deals with that topic, paragraph two deals with that topic. That makes it more organized. And then if you come behind that and go, well, since this is all dealing with this topic, let me put a little heading over it. And that way they know that's for that group. And then there'll be a little heading over this one. Then they know that that's what that paragraph's about. And it makes it more organized and orderly. And that's very important, I think, when it comes to how it reads. It's going to make you come across as much more professional. And if you're disorganized, people are going to, wait, what is she talking about here? I got to go back and read the first part again because I don't know what she's saying here. You want to make it very simple, and that's how you do it. And it does take a little more time to do that, but it really does help communicate better to your constituent or audience. There's a parking memo I'll show you a little bit later, and it comes in a paragraph like this, on the prompt, and it day shift employees, swing shift employees, day shift employees, all employees, day shift employees, swing shift. It's all over the place. And the answer to solving that is you create a paragraph for day shift, a paragraph for swing shift, a paragraph for all employees, and you put a heading over it, and you put a bullet list of everything they need to know, and you got a beautiful memo that can post on a bulletin board. That's the other thing about memos is, oftentimes they're posted on bulletin boards, they're posted on the break rooms, and if it's 4 pages long, and you think anybody's even going to read it, they're going to look at it and go, oh, forget that. But if it's one neat page, well organized, they're going to read it, and that's the idea of that. So, all right, I think that was it for how it reads. Now, how does it look? So, very important. Business writing is never double spaced, always single spaced paragraphs. The only thing in all business writing that's double spaced is the memo title block. That's it. Everything else should be single spaced. All your signature blocks, single spaced. All your address blocks, single spaced. Every paragraph, single spaced, separated by a space. That's very important. And we also don't want it all one paragraph. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's very important. And this is what I was going to say is that sometimes though your word processor settings have line spaces before and after the paragraph. So you might think you might set it for single space, but if you go to the paragraph settings, it says 8 or 6 before or after the paragraph. So you're not really getting true single space. They don't look double spaced, but they don't truly look single spaced either. So I have that happen a lot. So I encourage every student go in before you create your document and set all that to 0 and then begin to create your document. Or when you're all done, select the whole thing, set those to 0, set it to single space, and then start laying out how it looks. But either way, be careful that it's not double spaced. And I will mark you down if it's not truly single spaced. So I can't read your line spacing, but I can tell, or I'll say, please check your line spacing if it looks like it's off.
And how many inches should show for single space?
Your margin should be 1 inch, but you can tell a true single space when you set it for single space and set 0, all the lines before and after the 0. That's truly single spaced.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Go into the paragraph setting.
Okay.
You come up here to, yeah, you can see my screen, right? So if you go to, what is it, layout? I think it's paragraphs. Yeah. Actually, I can just select here, right click here, and then go to paragraphs. And then right here, see spacing before and after? That should be set to 0. And it'll be, sometimes it's default set to 8 or 10 or 12 or 6.
Oh, okay.
You got to go in and set that so that way you're not truly that way you're truly single spaced. Yeah. All right. Next thing is not only single space paragraphs but short paragraphs separated by spaces. So much better to have a bunch of short paragraphs down the page than two big long ones or one big long one. In fact, it should never be all one paragraph. My rule of thumb is even if it's 6 lines long, make it 2 3 lines paragraphs. Two 3 line paragraphs are going to be easier to read than one 6 line paragraph, right? So make them short. And if it's a long document, like really long, then you should shoot for around 8 lines per paragraph. Now that means if you count every line, right? So if I go back here, I have, the do, conversation, those are each all one line. Can you see that when I do it? Yeah. Each of those is a line, right? So if it's a paragraph, each of those is a line. 8 lines and then another paragraph after that. So, and no indents. So there is no tabbing in the first line. People like to do that in essay writing. They like tab in. Um, None of that. It's just single spaced paragraphs. Now the right side can be ragged. Sometimes we like to square up the right side too, and you can do that by going to the home screen and doing right here this setting right there, and you can make it justified on both sides. But you don't have. They say in business writing it's actually more appropriate to justify the left side, of course, but the right side can be left ragged. They call it ragged. So in other words, wherever the sentence or line ends, it automatically wraps to the next, and that's fine to do that. So anyway, no indents though. 8 lines max. Proper formatting. So definitely, if it's a letter, it should be a letter. If it's an email, it should be an email. If it's a memo, it should be a memo. And what I mean is there's certain margin settings, certain title blocks and signature blocks. All those documents have a certain way they're formatted. Good news is all of these documents are found throughout the book. There's samples of letters, there's samples of memos, and there's samples of emails. Plus, in all the assignments, I provide you samples as well. All right, that's pretty simple. But I will be grading on that. That's one of the key components I grade on is did you make it like I've had students just, put in the information like the letter, but they didn't do any formatting. So they get a 0. And I say, go back and format this like a memo. And then they'll have to do that. So all right, font size. So so it doesn't mean you can't use larger than 10 or 12 on like headings or things like that, but the body of your text should be 10 to 12 fonts. So I know that we like to use creative fonts and large stuff, but when it comes to the body of the text, it should be, plain text with the use of the text design, which I'll talk about, and then roughly 10 to 12. Anything smaller is hard to read. Anything larger kind of takes up unnecessary space. So that's very important. Definitely use headings if you can. Sometimes it just doesn't warrant it, but many times it really does. And like I said, if you chunk your information together in a paragraph, why not just put a heading over it, what the paragraph's about? That makes it super easy for your audience to scan that. They can go, oh, that paragraph's about that. I don't need to read it because it doesn't relate to me, but this one does, etc. Or I need to read that. That relates to me. So headings are extremely valuable in making your document scannable. My recommendation is make them bold, typically the same size font. But if you have a larger document, you might want to use a larger font. You might want to use all caps. That's fine. But use headings; they really make your document more scannable. And then definitely use bullet lists and numbered lists. And that's because these things take a paragraph of information and they make it a list that's easy to let your eye read right down the list, especially if you have any kind of list, any kind of, hey, I need these 6 things done. We'll list them, etc. And a lot of times it ends up being commas in a big paragraph and they get lost. So utilize numbered lists when it's a numbered or steps to take or a process to follow. Use a bullet list any other time, but use those liberally. I think they make a document super easy to scan and read. And then, of course, use text design. So bold, italic, underline, and yes, even all caps throughout your document. I think personally, every paragraph should have some text design to make something stand out. That way, your eye goes right down the page. You read the heading, you read the bold word here, the bold word there, the bold word there. You got it. You don't even have to spend your time like laboring through a paragraph. You got everything you need to know, and these make that extremely valuable to do. So those are very important. I look for all that. That this is the 50% side of your grade. I have a whole section. I have a whole grading category of readability. Did you do any of these things? And and that's what you're getting. That's pretty much 30% of your grade or 40% of your grade. And then fit it on one page. I already mentioned this, but it shouldn't really be longer than one page if it has to be. In other words, if you're going to use 40%, maybe a little tight, but I'd say 25% of the next page. If you're going to use any less than 25% of the next page, or yeah, I would make it one page. I would edit it down. You don't want to have a document, then you have one sentence on the last page. That just doesn't look professional. So edit it, fit it to one page. Even if it's a 5-page document, you get to the last page and it's one line on the next page. Edit it down to where it's 4 pages, right? That makes it just neater. So very important that you do that. And this is in this class, as I mentioned already, every single document shouldn't be more than one page. And if it's more than one page, edit it down to one page. That's what I would say. All right. And then business writing also utilizes graphics, tables, pictures. If you look at a very well done business report, it's loaded with pictures of people using the product, pictures of the product, tables and graphs and charts that show you some of the statistics and information they've gathered. And that is not just true in a business report, but even in smaller documents. If you're talking about sales reports or sales compared to last year, why not use a graphic? Why not use a chart to show it versus just typing it out? That's very much encouraged in business writing, that you want to utilize that kind of stuff. So I think that's pretty much it on the list. This is the final list that you would want to give for the discussion post assignment. You certainly don't have to copy mine per se. You can do your own, but many of these items are what I'm looking for when I grade the final list, just so you know. Any questions, Sarah? Or Sahara? So how do you pronounce Sarah? Sahar.
Sahar.
Sahar. Sahar.
Yes.
I said it the first time.
Yes. Uh, my question was about, yes. So when you want to write a memo, many people would ask, like, why are you writing this memo? What's going wrong? Or you want to explain, like, why are you writing the memo? What is the best way to do that?
Like as far as introducing the memo,
Yes, correct. Like
I
for
think
parking.
I think that you wouldn't want to say I'm writing this memo to you today because it's obvious that you're writing a memo, right? But I would say I would probably start my first sentence with this memo comes as the result of a request or due to some changes in policy. This this information in the memo is relevant to you starting on this date or whatever. I would put it in my introduction. Why the introduction should be to introduce the topic, and that could be why I'm writing it. It also is to establish a little credibility. If you're writing on something that you know nothing about, then that might not bring you across as credible, or maybe they already know that you know a lot about it, so they don't have to question, or maybe they think you know nothing about it, so you need to establish some credibility. You want to do all that in the introduction, and as well as some kind of thesis statement, some kind of statement that describes what you're going to talk about in the memo or in the letter or in the email. So I think that's kind of your introduction. So introducing the topic, and that could include why I'm writing it. Any need for me to establish any credibility or not, and then some kind of a thesis of what this memo is gonna cover. Those are probably the important pieces. Yeah. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense? Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I would be expecting to find it. All right, so I'm going to share with you some documents that are laid out. This one, you can't quite see the bold text for some reason. I think it's the font that was chosen. But here's a memo. This was the parking memo. This used to be your assignment. I changed it to the floating holiday assignment for the memo. But if you notice, it's formatted like a memo. Just a couple things. It has a double-spaced title block, and that whole area at the top is called title block. Date to from subject. Memos do use subject lines, and they always should have the word memo or memorandum on them. And then notice that there's no signature block at the bottom, only the initials of the author. In this case, I'm the author. It says Eric Doucette. That's who it's from. So I put my initials at the bottom, meaning that I wrote it. If I had a typist type it, I might put a colon and then the typist's initials. Or if I had somebody else draft it, I might put their initials, and I'm the one who sent it, but it comes under their pen. Either way, you don't need to do a full signature block on a memo. No sincerely, no your name, none of that. It's all in the title block. And then notice this was the one I was telling you about where it all came to you in one paragraph. and it was talking to swing shift and day shift and all employees and all that. So what we did was we took all the information relevant to all employees, put that first, and put a nice bold heading that says all employees. And by the way, in that correspondence, there was a mention that if you don't get registered and have a white ticket, you will get a ticket, a white pass, you'll get a ticket. So we made that really stand out because we don't want an employee to go, well, I didn't see that, you know. And if it was all lost in a paragraph, they would easily say, I didn't see that. Well, now we made it bold and all caps, and they have no excuse that they didn't see it. There it is, right there. And so all the information about that's relevant to all employees is in that short paragraph, and then the registration meeting. Then day shift employees, they had specific instructions given, so we just put it in a bullet list, made it super easy to read, and then we did the same thing with swing shift employees, and then we put our initials at the bottom. That's it. So now this would be posted on a bulletin board in a break room. Day shift employees would see, oh, there's a new policy for parking. What is it? I don't care about swing shift because I'm not swing shift. Oh, I can park in A and B, and I cannot use the curb for parking. And if I'm not using my space, I could let it lend to somebody else, but I will get a ticket. I saw that, so I better go get my car registered in the cafeteria on one of those dates. So I didn't even read it. I just scanned it, and I got what I needed to know. Right. So that's a sample of a memo. Let me give you another sample. I have another memo, but it's the floating holiday. And I don't want to give that to you because that's your assignment. So I'll give you a letter. Here's a good letter. This one is, unfortunately, they didn't use any text design other than bullet lists and headings, which I like, but I would have did bold in every single paragraph to make the important things stand out, right? So, but it's formatted beautifully. It has a letterhead at the top. It has the date line right here. Then it has the inside address. That's who you're writing the letter to. Then it has, by the way, all salutations should end in a colon. I know that people argue this, and your spell checker won't get it. But a colon is a little bit more formal way when you're using business documents. I think you should use a colon. And that this is a sample of that. I'll show you in a minute an email that was actually from a textbook. It also uses a colon for the salutation. And this is a great letter. It's laid out beautifully, and then it has a proper letter signature block, which is the room for a physical signature, then my typed name and my title. You could also add, if you want to, the corporation's name below that. But since this was on letterhead, it probably didn't need to be there. Either way, that is a perfectly executed signature block on a letter, and they did a beautiful job laying this out so it's not just all one paragraph. They use headings, so they have some questions and concerns. First questions and concerns deal with recruitment and selection. The second ones deal with job specific details. They're currently exploring the possibility of hiring a social media specialist. I would have made that bold because then they would have saw that. And also I'm looking like to request your assistance. I might have underlined or made that bold too. So that way they want assistance because they're exploring hiring social media specialists. That's all I need to know. And they have some questions, right? And I probably would have made each of these headings bold. But nonetheless, it does its job. I mean, you can scan it real easily. Maybe even here, I'd like to request a written response. Maybe I would also include a deadline date when I need it by, because that's very important whenever you're requesting something that you give the people a window of time to get it done. If you just leave it open ended, you might be waiting for 6 months. So give them a deadline date. And then also they say here, this information, I need a record so I can share with my CEO. So those are things I would probably make bold to stand out. And that way it makes your document even more scannable and readable. But this is a nicely formatted letter, and it does utilize some text design. So,
I have a question.
sure.
So, why at in LinkedIn, they are not using this format with posting jobs and, with the job description? This makes much more sense and makes, the job seeker's life is better, much
Yeah. Yeah, well, because they're paragraphs of information, and you're like, I got to labor through this. But there's probably a sense in which those are situations where you kind of do need to read in detail. You really do need to know what the requirements are versus a person obviously if it's a very formal letter, even then I still suggest using text design, but you want to make sure they're reading it thoroughly, because maybe there's some really critical information that you don't want them to miss. So in that context, that you probably would maybe use a little less because you want to force them to actually read it. Versus, I'm busy. There's a meeting coming up on this date at this time. I don't need all the details. Just tell me when and where, right? And that's what I make stand out. And I get my calendar. I go, okay, there's a meeting for this topic on this date. Okay, I'll be there. And maybe if I need to bring something with me, that's in bold. Bring with you your notes from the last meeting. Okay, I got that. It's on there bold. So I don't need all the rest, right?
Okay, makes sense.
This one's an email I'm showing you now. So this is out of another textbook that I was using for business communications, and just a few things about an email that are very important. I think, well, I don't need to worry about formatting an email because there are no margins, and that's true. And but there is a signature block, and there is things like your subject line are very important to an email. So being creative or being specific in your subject line is very helpful. Unless you're using the indirect strategy, you want to be careful not to reveal the negative news or the main idea in the subject line because you're waiting to build up your audience to give them that information in your body of your message. But other than that, be as specific as you can in your and even lengthy as needed to make sure your subject line is clear and specific enough. It should never just say meeting or never just say, one word or two words. It should really be somewhat descriptive. And many people make a decision whether or not to even read your email based off the subject line because that's all they see originally. And sometimes the first line of your message. So make sure your subject line is put time into that to make sure it's what you want to communicate in the first thing they see. Same thing with the attachment, and how the attachment's worded. But notice this email has a salutation, which is "Hi, Stephanie." They use a colon to end the salutation. And a lot of people in emails don't use salutations. They almost feel like it's instant messaging or texting. So they just type the message. But we should utilize in a business email the opportunity to foster goodwill by greeting the person we're writing, making it clear who it's addressed to, and then, utilizing the opportunity we have for fostering goodwill. Notice the very first line, thank you. Thanks for the call this morning. They're showing appreciation, right? They're expressing relationship. Business environment is a relational environment, so we need to write that way when we're writing. And then this one uses a numbered list because they're going to basically be requesting some sponsorships. So they have a fee that they're expecting. They're going to provide. They're going to let you use your logo. They're going to have a booth for you. Um, Also, but you're responsible to bring your own equipment, but you can see in the equipment support section what you need. You may be able to rent a projector if you want. And so they made some of it bold. I would have did more. I think more is better, but at least it's in a list. At least there's some bold text to get my attention on things that matter. And then they give a nice, pleasant closing. And then the main thing, though, is look at their signature block. I mean, it is complete, right? It has name, title, company name, phone number, office number, cell number, email address. You might even include your office extension if you have an extension in addition to the home number. So this is why you might say, well, why do you do that on an email? Because a professional business email, you want those people who you're emailing to be able to call you. What if they got upset about something? What if they misunderstood something? What if they need some clarification? You want them to be able to pick up the email and dial their phone and call you right then, rather than, oh, where's their number? Now I got to look it up and I'm scanning through my Rolodex or on my computer or whatever. So make it easy. This opens up those lines of communication, and that's why a business email, professional email, should have a full signature block in it. So all your documents that you're going to create need to be formatted with one of these three formats, and and the use of text design. All right, I think that was the only samples I have right now. I might have another. I do. Let's see. No, I think I had another. That was the good email, good letter. Yeah, that's all I have up right now. So I think you get the point, though. Correct? Yes?
Yes, yes, it's very clear.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's all I have for this Zoom session. If you have any questions about anything else, feel free to ask me or anything about this topic.
So pretty much the do's and don'ts. Since you mentioned everything in your list, so it's okay, right? to use
Yeah,
your
you
list.
can use my list. But what I would recommend is if you haven't done your initial list yet, maybe just do it from memory or whatever. Just do it from memory, and then but do it as I give you the instructions. So do your initial list and then view and comment other students. You can do that on the same day, that's fine. But then your final list, wait till the last week and upload the final list, and you can upload the list I just did. That's fine.
Okay,
Or you can, do your initial list now and then on the same day that you look at other students' lists, then upload my list, right? That's fine.
okay, okay.
I just
Thank you.
don't want them to be all on the same day because
Sure.
then the idea of this assignment is that you're going in at least a couple of times and
Okay,
updating your list.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else? Or I'm going to stop.